outside the home where police found the gruesome scene.
A house that should have been safe. There are crime scenes that disturb detectives, and then there are crime scenes that break them. The Boren family massacre belongs to the second category. It was not just the violence that left hardened investigators in tears. It was who the victims were, how they were killed, and what the crime revealed about trust, control, and buried rage inside a family that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. On a quiet night, in a neighborhood where children rode bikes and neighbors waved politely from driveways, an entire family was erased. No signs of forced entry, no screams heard by neighbors, no warning. What investigators found inside that house would haunt them for years. This is the story of the Boren family massacre, a case that still stands as one of the most emotionally devastating crimes law enforcement ever handled. The Boren family, normal on the surface. The Boren family appeared unremarkable in the best possible way. They lived in a modest suburban home. They attended school events, family gatherings, and holiday dinners. Neighbors described them as quiet, polite, and private. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. The father was known as hardworking, serious, and reserved. The mother was described as caring, devoted, and protective of her children. The kids were doing well in school. No major behavioral problems, no obvious signs of distress. There were no police calls, no domestic violence reports, no public meltdowns. But as detectives would later discover, what happens inside a family's walls is often invisible until it's too late. Behind closed doors, tension was building, slowly, silently, and dangerously. The morning that changed everything. The massacre was discovered not because of screams or alarms, but because of silence. The family failed to show up for school. Phone calls went unanswered. Doors remained closed. Concerned relatives and school officials began calling. When no one answered, police were asked to perform a welfare check. Officers arrived expecting anything from illness to a family emergency. They were not prepared for what waited inside. When the door opened, the smell hit first. Metallic, heavy, unmistakable. Then the silence. Every room told a story, and every story ended the same way. The Boren family had been systematically murdered inside their own home. The crime scene that broke detectives. Veteran detectives later admitted this scene was different. Not chaotic, not rushed, but methodical. Each family member had been killed deliberately. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no evidence of an intruder fighting for control. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was not random violence. This was personal. Children were found in their bedrooms. The mother was located elsewhere in the home. The father's position raised immediate questions. Detectives walked through the house slowly, quietly, some unable to speak. One investigator later said, "You don't forget the way children look when violence enters a place where they should be safest." Several officers had to step outside. One reportedly broke down in tears. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was the destruction of an entire family unit. No forced entry, no strangers. As the forensic team worked, a chilling conclusion emerged. There were no signs of forced entry. Windows were intact, doors were locked. Nothing appeared stolen. The killer had either been let inside or already lived there. This shifted the investigation immediately. Statistically, murders inside the home, especially those involving children, are rarely committed by strangers. Detectives knew this. The question was no longer who broke in. The question became who had access. The father under the microscope attention quickly turned to the father. His position in the home, the absence of defensive wounds on others, the controlled nature of the killings. Everything pointed towards someone who knew the house, knew the family's routines, and felt ownership over them. But the most unsettling detail was still coming. Evidence suggested the killings occurred over a short period, quietly, efficiently, with no chaos. This wasn't a crime of sudden rage. It was decided, planned, carried out with terrifying calm. Detectives began uncovering details about the father's mindset, details that painted a far darker picture than neighbors ever imagined. A life built on control. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. The father struggled with control over his family, control over his image, control over his future, financial stress, emotional rigidity, an inability to tolerate perceived failure. Friends later admitted he didn't handle stress well, but no one imagined this outcome. To him, the family wasn't just loved ones. They were extensions of himself. And when his sense of control began to slip, something inside him fractured. The final decision. The most horrifying realization for detectives was this: the father did not see his actions as murder. In his distorted thinking, he believed he was making a final decision, ending something he no longer felt he could manage. Investigators believe the killings were preceded by internal justification, fear of exposure, fear of failure, fear of losing authority. Instead of facing consequences, he chose annihilation. The idea that his family could exist without him, or that he could exist without control, was intolerable. So he erased them. The aftermath. Inside the house, evidence suggested the father moved through the home calmly, room to room, victim to victim. There was no frenzy, just completion. When detectives reconstructed the timeline, the emotional weight crushed them. Children likely never understood what was happening. The mother may have realized, but far too late. This was not violence born in the moment. This was violence carried out with cold certainty. Why this case haunted police officers are trained to compartmentalize. But the Boren family massacre shattered that barrier. Why? Because it forced them to confront a terrifying truth. You cannot always see danger coming. No criminal history, no outward warning signs, no dramatic breakdown witnessed by others. Just a quiet man with unresolved control issues and access to everyone he loved. One detective later said, "We kept asking ourselves, how many families look just like this from the outside? The children left without a voice." Perhaps the hardest part of the case was the children. They had no say, no warning, no chance. They were victims of an adult's inability to confront his own failures. Their bedrooms, once filled with toys, homework, and dreams, became crime scenes. That contrast is what destroyed seasoned investigators. The brutality wasn't loud, it was silent. The psychology of family annihilators. The Boren case fits a disturbing pattern known as family annihilation. These crimes are often committed by men who feel absolute ownership over their family, fear humiliation or loss of status, see death as a way to preserve control. They don't view their family as independent people. They view them as possessions. When the illusion of control collapses, annihilation becomes, disturbingly, the final solution. Community in shock. The neighborhood never recovered. Neighbors replayed every interaction, every smile, every casual conversation. How did we miss it? Could we have done something? But the truth is brutal. Some dangers hide in plain sight. This family wasn't failed by warning signs. They were failed by silence, both internal and external. The case that still hurts. Years later, detectives still reference the Boren family massacre, not because of complexity, but because of impact. It reminded them why their job matters and why prevention is so difficult. You can't arrest thoughts, you can't police hidden despair, and you can't always save people who don't know they're in danger. A lesson written in blood. The Boren family massacre is not just a crime story, it is a warning about unchecked control, about untreated psychological collapse, about the myth that danger always looks dangerous. Sometimes it looks normal, sometimes it smiles at neighbors, sometimes it tucks children into bed, and sometimes, without warning, it destroys everything. The house still stands, but for those who walked through it that day, nothing was ever the same again.